And this is the number 6 lecture series, online lecture series on behalf of our center. And today we have Professor Shafi Mustafa, Shafi Muhammad Mustafa. He is very good friend of us, and he is an eminent academician in his field, comparative religion and peace. And he is an assistant professor in the Department of World Religion and Culture at the University of Dhaka, Bangladesh. At the same time, he is a research scholar, the New England University, Australia, and he contributed a number of articles in very reputed world-class journals, and regularly he contributes book chapters. And he recently, I think, he has a manuscript. He wrote a manuscript which will be published from most probably Routledge, Shafi bhai,
Yeah,
if I am not wrong. It
yeah,
will be
you're right.
published very shortly. Very interesting topic. He worked on terrorism, security. Recently, I came to know he's working on Al Qaeda. Role of the women in ISI. I think.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
very interesting. So today he will speak on the end of Cold War to COVID-19, COVID-19 and clash of narratives. Very interesting topic. So we are all of us we are eagerly waiting to hear you. So now floor is yours, sir.
Okay, thank you, Professor Devashish Dondi, for inviting me to this online lecture. And it's my pleasure to be invited by the Center for Studies of South and Southeast Asian Societies, Kazi Road University. Yes, I am intent to talk about today about the COVID-19 and clash of narratives from the end of Cold War to the COVID-19. And I'm also welcoming all of you. And so I think it's a brief paper on this topic. And if you can't follow me, you can raise your hand and you can ask me question. No worries. Maybe I this is for the first time I'm lecturing online. So if you, if you and I think everybody, we're all experiencing a different world. We could have been talking face to face rather than just washing your face. I can't see all of your face because it's hide, but it's always better to know the audience who is listening to me, and to I always love to do that because it's always better to see the audience how they're feeling, whether they can follow me or not. This is very important. But as we were pushed to this kind of situation, we can't change. So of course, maybe sound is coming from somewhere. Okay, so I'm going to start my talk on this topic. So I will begin with the Western narrative, and then I will end up with the narrative of the COVID-19. So the logical starting point is the narrative of American unipolar world order that President George H. W. Bush first proclaimed in 1991, the following the sudden fall of the USS Soviet a rivalry that had divided the world since the 1945. Based initially on the American formula of liberal democracy, free markets, international consensus, George H. W. Bush, the father of George W. Bush, committed the United States to build a new world order that would establish a single global system governed by the rule of law, not the rule of the jungle. George H.W. Bush said it in 11 September 1990. Although foreseeing the role for the United Nations in this enterprise, the Bush later clarified that if it proved necessary, then the United States would act alone. Since it was the only power with the resources and strength to shape the future and to maintain the peace. Summing up what George H.W. Bush had proclaimed a rare transforming moment of the world history. The Francis Fukuyama, I think you all heard about the Francis Fukuyama and his work, uh, The End of History and the Last Man. In this work, he said the US had evolved the final and the universal form of human government, which it would uniquely bring to the world. No one else could do this. Even Russia could no longer offer an alternative political system. And he also referred to Islam. He said that Islam as a political system can only appeal to a minority of Muslim, fundamentalist Muslims. So he seemed to be in no doubt that under America's custodial leadership, the 21st century would be a century of peace. So against this backdrop, against his student of Fukuyama, so Huntington came in he published it in 1992, his book, The Fukuyama. And then the Huntington was Fukuyama's teacher, and he published in 1992, just after the Cold War. And he proposed a completely the opposite theory of the Francis Fukuyama, and he said not only would the next century witness the conflict on a larger scale between the entire civilizations, but also the resurgent Islam would become the West's main protagonist in determining how the world would function and what its future would look like. So, where the Fukuyama said that the next century would be a century of peace, against that, the Huntington is saying that no, the next world is going to be a clash between the civilizations. In 1993, when it first appeared, Huntington's Clash of Civilizations thesis was universally derided by scholars as utterly wrong. Although it continues to be cited in hundreds, probably thousands of studies as a starting point of thinking about the post-Cold War context of the international relations. The story it tells is still regarded as essentially fanciful. While the longevity of the thesis has given critics pause for the thought that he may have got something right, the same old question marks remain hanging over it unanswered. So in the event of 9/11 served to deflate now the 9/11 served to deflate the Fukuyama's end of history narrative. So when the 9/11 happened, then the Fukuyama's theory of the century-long Pax Americana ended, and his narrative was got wrong. It immediately paved the way for the George W. Bush, the son of George H.W. Bush's 20 September 21 Declaration on War on Terror, and his 17 September 2022 National Security Strategy Statement, both of which prescribed a different world order to his father's. Based on neoconservative project for the new American century, September 2000 blueprint for maintaining US supremacy in the world, this envisages the extending America's global leadership through the preeminence of its military forces, pushing forward the frontiers of its own values and interests regardless of the cost. With international support being sought from the allies and friends rather than from the UN, the New World Order of the 2002 was expected to provide the basic principles of global consensus. The US subsequently followed this agenda to the letter in committing troops in multiple theaters of conflict, such as Afghanistan in 2001 to hunt down Osama bin Laden, and Iraq in 2003 to destroy its weapons of mass destruction, topple Saddam Hussein, and introduce liberal democracy. With the US soon getting bogged down in Iraq and Afghanistan, it became clear, even his supporters, that the strategy was unlikely to persuade the large parts of the Muslim world to willingly to join the George W. Bush's world order. The war on terror was failing to deliver that it had promised of making the world safer and better. As a framework of analysis, the war on terror began to be overtaken in turn by Huntington's clash of civilizations. It has simply made little sense of homegrown terrorist attacks against culturally based Western targets. In Huntington's reading of the future, the world will increasingly be split into dichotomies of us versus them. While not speculating about how this might end up, he suggests that the outcome would certainly be influenced by the extent to which the Muslim masses succumb to the worldview of radical Islamists. So this is the Western narrative is that based on their thought, their rule of law, they are imposing on the others. As Huntington said, the next world would be the resurgent Islam would be a challenge. So now I'm entering into the Al Qaeda narrative, what Al Qaeda actually proposed. So until the advent of the Islamic State, the dominant anti-Western discourse was simple, historically based narrative propagated by Al Qaeda. In line with its declaration of war on United States and its allies in 1998, this tells of a Muslim resistance to foreign invasions, starting with the Crusaders and continuing with the Ibn Taymiyyah's preaching of the Jihad against the Mongols in the 13th century, and culminating in the military omnipresence of the US in the Middle East since the World War II. So frequently did Osama bin Laden invoke the heroic examples of Ibn Taymiyyah. I think some of you are wondering about the Ibn Taymiyyah. Who is Ibn Taymiyyah? The Taymiyyah is one of the renowned scholar in the 13th century, uh, and he declared jihad against the Mongols. So the ostensibly this fight back is to take the form of a defensive jihad in retaliation against the West for occupying Muslim lands. So I'm just summing up here that the Al Qaeda's initial target was to send back the troops or the uh, to send back the American troops out of the Middle East. That was their primary target. But a more in-house narrative that the dismissing any accommodation between the Western and Islamic civilizations as an infidel notion designed to postpone the inevitable clash between them. The projects a very different struggle. Through offensive jihad, the road ahead involves the total war to occupy the lands of the Western unbelief and they extends their system of government for Islamic system. In effect, the Al Qaeda was committing itself and the whole of Islamic world, if it could win it over, to a conventional, uncompromising global fight to finish as a religious duty. So, so the two kind of narrative from the Al Qaeda. Number one, their first target is to get rid of the Western military forces in the Middle East, and the second one, and they call it the offensive jihad, and they want to capture the whole Western world. But no time frame or chronology has been placed on this mission. In the aftermath of the 9/11 and the immediate type of engagement restored to was a series of isolated lone of attacks on soft targets. Whether incidences such as these are designed to counter unbelief has not been elaborated, and they have not appeared to have impacted or brought forward the departure of the United States from Afghanistan, Iraq, and the Middle East. So their soft targets was not successful in the sense that what they are looking for, the withdrawal of the military from the Middle East through their line of attacks, it didn't work. Rather, with the Arab Spring being civil war, bringing civil war to the Syria, Iraq, Libya, Yemen, and the bitter and bloody sectarian violence escalating between Sunni and Shia Muslims. It has been the Arab heartland of Islam itself that has seemed to be facing civilizational challenge. So while they're looking for the withdrawal of American troops from the Middle East, rather they are now suffering within the civilization. They are suffering the internal clash. So in this scenario, the Islamic State it entered. The what does make the headway is the doomsday story that Daesh or Islamic State, as it has become the more commonly known in the West, began to circulate with the Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, assumed its leadership in 2010 and declared a worldwide caliphate in 2014. More theologically oriented than Al Qaeda, I'm talking about now ISIS. Um, can everybody follow me? Professor Devashishda, can you follow me? Everyone?
Yes, yes, sir, we can
Yeah,
follow you.
yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so sometimes the response needed, whether I am just saying or whether you can follow me or not, is very important. So so now I'm talking about after the Al Qaeda. So uh, now the Islamic State entered into the scenario. So since its beginning, the Islamic State is focusing on the end time narrative. So in this narrative, now I'm talking about the ISIS narrative. In this narrative, which is based on Hadith literature and Muhammad's prophecies, the Antichrist, which Muslims call the Masih Dajjal, suddenly appears, and Prophet Isa, Jesus Christ, returns to earth to lead Muslims alongside the Mahdi in some versions to final victory over the Jewish-led forces of unbelief. The outcome is the establishment of a world order based totally on Islam. So while ISIS continues to support and encourage conventional and asymmetrical sub-targets on the West, its recurring message to the Muslim is to stand up and be counted when the end time comes. Joining Islamic State is prescribed not only as a preparation for the day of judgment, but also as holding out the divinely accredited prospect of martyrdom and entry paradise. This is particularly the case for the South Asian Muslims. So this is very important that for the South Asian Muslims, whom both Al Qaeda and ISIS exhort to prepare the cataclysmic war with India, that is Ghazwatul Hind, a prophecy which is usually attributed to Muhammad. This story has gained traction following recent jihadist attacks on Indian-controlled Kashmir and moves by the Modi governments to alter Kashmir's special constitutional status and potentially strip the Assam's 4 million Muslims of Indian citizenship. All of India's 195 million Muslims, in fact, would be rendered foreigners if BJP government's agenda of making India a Hindu state came to fruition. According to Jean Philiou, the apocalyptic narratives of any kind were generally regarded by Muslims with suspicion before the US invaded Iraq in 2003. So this is the point why the entire narrative is gaining momentum. So that's what the John Phillips said, that after the invasion of the US in Afghanistan and in Iraq, that story, that apocalyptic narratives is gaining momentum among the mass Muslims. That's what the John Phillips is saying, especially after the Iraq. So now, while this is gaining momentum, so now we have some evidences to show that yes, those incidences is really uh, fostering the entire narrative among the Muslim masses. Let's see the traditional scholarly reinforcement, what the traditional scholars say. So while what is significance is that this proverbial day of judgment is deemed to be close at hand not only by Muslim militant Islamists but also by traditional scholars. And there are some Muslim scholars through their writings, books, articles, YouTube videos, they say the countdown to the Malhama, that is the Great War, that is Great War between the infidel force and the Islam. And that countdown has begun. If we note one or two writings, especially the Sheikh Imran Hussein of the Trinidad, and he has published more than 20 books, and he traveled all over the world, and he's a renowned Islamic scholar, and he has grouped the signs or the portents of the last day into the environmental, like the environmental science, the Saudi Arabia turning green, it is prophesied, and then the Sea of Galilee dying up, and uh, and the Euphrates River is being diverted to reveal a mountain of gold that Imran Hussain said that is the oil that has already revealed. And there is another that the Bedouins competing to build the tallest skyscrapers. And there's a political science, I mean, the rise of Israel under the Antichrist, the invasions of Iraq and Syria, the worst people would become the leaders, the proliferation of violence and murder in the world as the last day approaches. And there is also the social science, like the women will dress like men, men will dress like women, the same-sex marriage, the sexual promiscuity, and the breakdown of family. So, however, what has served to give the Islamic anthem discourse not only considerable currency, but also the prima facie immediately is the coronavirus pandemic. In Islamic eschatology, the advent of life-ending pestilence signals the predicted coming of the last day. So when the current world will end and a new world of order of existence will begin. COVID, that I'm entering into the COVID-19, that if initially a number of conspiracy theories were floated involving the Israel as both the perpetrator and beneficiary of the transformation COVID-19 would trigger. So I'm not going to read out the COVID-19 narrative, but what I can summarize that the COVID-19, the terrorist organizations, they have also picked up this COVID-19, and they are saying that this is the act of God. The Al Qaeda says this is the act of God, and this is for the evil people. And ISIS's narrative is changing over the time. Initially, they blamed communist China. Now they are blaming uh, the America for doing that. But what is very important that COVID-19 has been used by such terrorist organizations to ramp up recruitment. if they have yet to directly align to the approach of end time. But already there are some scholars they're saying that the COVID-19 is the beginning of the Malhama. So what I can see that this has been using by different people in different way. And COVID-19, what the Sheikh Imran Hussein of Trinidad said, he has no doubt at all that the COVID-19, which has been accompanied by global lockdown and the suspension of economic activity around the world, is actually the beginning of Malhama and the great battle to decide humanity's fate and the kind of world order that will ensue. Um, is that remaining 7 minutes? Within 7 minutes, uh, this will be a stop.
Yeah, yeah. After that, we will have to re-log in for the interactive session.
Oh, okay, so I'm going to finish it so quickly. So now the above discussion leads us to conclude that the entire narrative have come to constitute a major part of extremism as in propaganda. And COVID-19 is helping them to gain momentum. In times of global crisis and upheaval, it is not unusual for apocalyptic theories of doomsday to spring up. In a sense, Huntington's Clash of Civilizations also countenances the possibility of a future catastrophic confrontation between Islam and the West, the mother of all conflicts. But unfolding in civilizational rather than the prophetic religious form, this clash is not envisaged, certainly not by Huntington, to result anytime soon, if ever, in a universal Islamic world order. Whether or not the Muslims on the street have heard about have heard of Huntington and his thesis, they know about the end time prophecies and have every reason to believe them. The world they inhabit is a world of obvious transcendental disorder that the Basam TV said. Al Qaeda and ISIS have succeeded in neutralizing what George W. Bush's constabulary world order of peace. And the poverty, corruption, deprivation, war, and everyday terrorism has tarnished the allure and the credentials of any human-made world order for an increasing number of Islamic scholars. With the COVID-19 threatening to hit even the affluent countries hard, unemployment rates set to rise to levels not seen since the Great Depression. It is reasonable to assume that the poorest countries, especially the war-torn Muslim countries like Afghanistan, Iraq, Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, and Yemen, will be hit hardest of all. COVID-19 is even bringing states like the Lebanon with the low level of corona infection to the brink of the civil and political breakdown. The question is, will it also provide the conditions for the spread of Islamist radicalization, which Huntington especially warned about, and help make the end of world narrative the narrative of default for Muslims in general? Only time will tell. Thank you very much for listening to me.
Thank you very much.
Ashish?
Thank you very much. So we have only 3 minutes, I think.
Yeah.
We have to re-log in for the interactive session. Otherwise, yes, we can start. We can take one question in this session.
Yes.
Once it expires, then we will re-log in for rest of the questions. So
Oh,
I
that's fine.
request
Yeah.
participants to comment or ask questions. Uh, so I definitely would like to start with Devashishta.
Okay. Very nice presentation by uh, Shafi Muhammad Mustafa. Really, you have enjoyed your lecture. You have argued for the alternative narrative of Islam and how jihad was escalated in the world, and you have tried to justify it, and you have talked about the thesis of Huntington. You have talked about the uh, views of Francis Fukuyama, and you have actually divided the different views which is supportive and opposite of jihadism. Can you tell me just one thing? I have a small question. Is jihad can be a very good instrument for eliminating the evil forces of society?
Thank you, Professor Devashish. The jihad in Islam is of two kinds: the jihad, the defensive jihad, and the offensive jihad. So, but Islam definitely puts emphasis on the defensive one, or the jihad with the inner self, not to purify himself, not to others.
Yes, 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 yes,
So
yes.
if this is the spirit of the jihad, then I think if everybody strive to purify himself, like now ask the question, everybody, if they ask question themselves, what I'm doing, what I'm thinking, what I'm doing for others, what is my day-to-day life, I'm just living for myself, or I'm living for others. I mean, the jihad is the good thing, is a good idea that can purify a man. And in Islam, the stress on this kind of jihad is most. So before going for the external one, and that is also debatable to what extent you go for that jihad, and that is very uh, debatable issue. I do not want to engage myself on that jihad, but rather where Islam put stress on most, that is the internal jihad, the jihad with the oneself to improve himself, to make himself better for the other people. So I would say yes, in that sense, that kind of jihad can be best way to to counter all the social evils. Yeah, that's what I can say. Yeah,
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Next we can go for the next session.
Yeah, that's right.
yeah. I think we can log out and we can then log in. The same
Yeah, yeah.
ID.
ID and
Yes,
password.
ID and password will remain same.
Okay, so